In a world dominated by technology and industry, how can cultural narratives like folklore shape how students perceive and interact with nature? So good morning. I am Alyssa Angalot, presenting my proposed teaching module. So this is designed for an hour and a half with undergraduate students in mind, particularly those taking up literature or even those taking environmental classes. So this is intended to equip them with an ecocritical lens through which they can approach and understand nature in literature, specifically in Philippine folklore. So this aims to inform students that folklore reflects nature not as this silent or passive background or victim, but rather as this living, transformative space that teaches humans respect, responsibility, and restraint. Now, more often than not, mythical beings are embedded in these narratives. So, mga agta, duende, aswang, and engkantos. And it is through these that nature exemplifies agency and at times punitive authority. But for this module, we will be highlighting only engkantos, not strictly as these mischievous creatures, but more on the fact that they are also guardians of nature. They are enforcers of moral responsibility and environmental consciousness. So from this lesson, students will not only recognize the authority that engkantos or nature possess, but they can also become aware of anthropocentric actions that society has long learned, socialized, and continue to practice. So in other words, they can realize that nature is not and should not be reduced to a mere resource for us to exploit, but rather as a space or a force that demands respect. And when students can get a solid grasp of this, they can relate the legend's themes to any present environmental violations or transgressions that we humans have perpetuated and can open discourse on such. But for them to properly embody that eco-awareness, we first start with open sharing, okay? Knowing where the students stand with nature, knowing the degree to which our beliefs, our superstitions, or mga tuo-tuo inform how they act when they are in nature. So, do the students believe ba that somewhere hidden in the trees or in the forest, there really is something watching? Are these students careful where they step because they believe ba nga, oh, they might risk trespassing on an engkanto's home? So we find out how, or better yet, if our cultural narratives are already effectuating some kind of influence over the students' interactions with their environment. So on that subject, we then transition and bring up the engkantos, and we go over perceptions about them. So we establish na, just like Francisco Demetrio wrote in his essay on engkanto belief, no, that these creatures are generally perceived to be as whimsical, mysterious, enchanting. They often play pranks on us. But students should also know that these engkantos can also judge our actions. They can punish as they see fit because they are acting out of this imperative to protect the environment, to protect their home, because they are part of it. They are one with it. Now, since we are unpacking the role of non-human creatures, folklore, and nature all at once, eco-criticism can thus be introduced here because, after all, it is the study of literature, the environment, and the ecology. Now, at this preliminary or precursory level, Timothy Clark's introduction to literature and the environment can be used as an anchor or at least a guiding material, especially when we drive this angle further by explaining some fundamental concepts like anthropocentrism and biocentrism. Now, the distinctions between them is important to elucidate because the former, being man-oriented, heavily underlies most of our actions, whereas the latter, or biocentrism or ecocentrism, this is something that we must collectively strive for and advocate because it accords intrinsic value and respect to the environment. So knowing these two will allow the students to determine the kind of relationships that they are actively, presently cultivating with nature. And since it is necessary to promote a biocentric way of life or a perspective, we can discuss that in our local legends, in our folklore, nature is not this passive background that we utilize just to color the story. No, nature, like the forests, for instance, are watchful, active, they are transformative. And nature responds to human encounters and enact firm correction. So with all of these core information presented, we can then proceed to reading or unpacking the story. Now, the story that I have chosen is this Ilocano tale titled Dangkaw. Okay, so this was chosen because this is very concise and candid, and it really presents a clear picture of what kinds of actions can be categorized as anthropocentric or biocentric. And moreover, it succinctly presents how nature, through its non-human entities, confront human abuse and moderate human behavior, especially when it has become too exploitative and careless. So for a bit of context now about this legend, it's actually about Dangkaw, this hunter, who excessively kills the forest creatures. No consideration, no regard. And so one day, the fairy or the engkanto in the forest decides that she's had enough. So she confronts Dangkaw and punishes him. And we see the layers in her punishment entails the separation of Dangkaw from his family, removal from the human world, and his care for the forest creatures for eternity. So, stewardship. Now, this shows a symbolic arisal of his approach towards nature. Diba? From hunter to steward, from anthropocentric to biocentric. So, after reading and unpacking the story, students can then pair up and process what they understood. They can talk about what they think with their partners as guided by the prompt questions here. And perhaps after 5 to 10 minutes, they can share with the class what they think so that we can have an open discussion, and from which we, instructors, can gauge how the legend of Dangkaw is received by the students, what are the takeaways and lessons that they got from Dangkaw, what were the human violations or transgressions that they found out, and moreover, instructors can determine whether more guidance is needed in terms of applying eco-criticism or navigating its concepts. We can see which areas need more further clarification and so on. So to wrap up the module's discussion proper, we can then synthesize and reiterate very critical points, namely that engkanto, again, is not limited to mischief or pranks. Okay? They react because human wrongdoings require rectification. And as beings that inhabit the environment, they represent how nature, again, is a moral force, and it holds us accountable for what we do. And finally, we go full circle. Cultural narratives like folklore can shape students' perceptions by revealing how we interact with nature and by reinforcing the principle that nature should be treated with utmost respect. So in other words, legends such as this suggest regular reassessment of our actions and bolsters environmental responsibility, for otherwise, we invite nature's reckoning. Now with that said, A short reflection activity can be provided thereafter to encourage them to apply their learnings to real-life circumstances. So this enables them to retrospectively evaluate their activities, while also invites them to really think about how they can be more conscious as they go forward. So this furthers an internalization of ecological cognizance, not just at the level of literary analysis, but also at the level of contemplation of lived practices. Now, lastly, as a final bring-home activity or assessment that would help the students broaden their perspectives on encantos, usher them to engage more with regional tales, cultural narratives, as well as to help them practice ecocritical analysis, students can research 2 other Encanto legends, 3 if they want more, and they can analyze and examine how Encantos are portrayed in those legends, what they symbolize, what those legends reveal about nature, and what human violations or transgressions are being addressed there. So the intention behind this is to foster more appreciation and attention to cultural narratives that we have, and to provide an avenue for students to comprehend that we are not masters of nature, but participants in a shared world. And when necessary, nature intervenes. So, thank you so much for listening.